Illinois state budget still has yet to be sent to Governor J.B. Pritzker. It's really early, actually, because the budget doesn't start until July 1st. And if you recall, typically lawmakers have spring session until May 31st, but they wrapped it up April 8th, saying that they got a lot done last year and they didn't need that much time this year. But others speculate that it's an election year with the primary coming up in June. People wanted to get back to their districts to campaign, especially with new legislative maps. So they had a shortened session and they passed the largest state spending plan in state history at $45.6 billion. Spends almost all of the $45.7 billion. You're talking more money for education, higher education. Lawmakers gave themselves raises. You've got hundreds of millions of dollars going to various law enforcement operations. You even have the funding for after-school programs and Medicaid programs, and a whole host of spending is set to go out. But that package of bills has yet to be sent to Governor J.B. Pritzker. But the measures also include tax incentives. I do want to talk more about this, and I got to get with State Representative Tim Butler. Maybe we can line him up for sometime Thursday morning to talk more about all of this. But one of the things that he was pushing for, got into it with some tax incentives, dealing with microchip manufacturers. So that's in the mix. Other tax issues we're not going to stop debating and talking about, of course. With increased inflation, something else we'll get a new number on today. So we'll review that after the numbers released after 7:30 this morning. But with high costs, high inflation, there were people looking for tax breaks and tax cuts. And there's $1.8 billion in tax cuts in this planned budget for the coming fiscal year. And that includes the earned income tax credit, a property tax rebate, an income tax rebate, tax credits for teachers, and also the freezing of the 1% 1% grocery tax, dropping that down to zero, and freezing the looming 2.2 cent gas tax increase that's set to go into effect July 1st. The legislation that passed has yet to get to the governor that would postpone that kicking in for 6 months. So instead it would kick in January, which I think would set that up. I got to go back and read the language. I think that would set that up for 2 tax increases on your gas set for 2023, right? Because if they move the July 1st, 2022 tax increase on your gas to January 1st of 2023, I got to look at the language again, but did they also move the July 1st, 2023 gas tax increase, or did they keep that in place? So, again, interesting to see what ultimately is going to happen there. But we'll be talking with Josh Sharp from the Illinois Fuel and Retail Association specifically about that gas tax provision. But for the past 3 years or so, there's been an ongoing debate and something that I think is important to better understand what's going on here. Governor J.B. Pritzker, when he talks about the budgeting that's happened over the past 3 years, he always kind of refers back to the budget impasse. And if you recall, former Governor Bruce Rauner, as a Republican, going up against a General Assembly that had majority Democrats, supermajority Democrats in both chambers. He was trying to get, a right size of government, I guess is one way he characterized it, making sure it's more efficient, looking for the possibility of reducing taxes on Illinoisans and businesses. But all of those conversations came to a screeching halt when there was a budget impasse for 2 years, 2.5 years it was. And they had continued appropriations. So bills still were being paid, though the backlog of unpaid bills skyrocketed to like $16 billion. And then you get all the interest involved there. But the Democrats, they blame Governor Bruce Rauner for that back then, and they still do it now today. But there's been an effort from some Republicans to kind of reset that narrative and say, listen, it was the Democrats who had control of the legislature. And in particular, former House Speaker Michael Madigan passed a budget that was like $7 billion out of balance, something that then Governor Bruce Rauner just couldn't sign. And that seemed to start this kind of back and forth where for most of that impasse, the legislature never even passed a budget out of both chambers. So interesting to see how that gets framed even now 3+ years later. And now looking even just in the past 3 years, you get an interesting take on what's been happening here with the budget and how it's discussed from either side, Democrats and Republicans. So when Governor Pritzker took office, there was a high bill backlog. He was pushing for a progressive income tax. He ultimately got that question on the ballot. And back in 2020, if you remember, that was an issue that was moving forward. They approved the ballot initiative in 2019 to be on the 2020 ballot. And that would have changed Illinois' flat income tax to one with graduated rates in an effort that they said could spur on $3 billion of increased taxes coming into the state coffers. So that did not pass in November of 2020, even throughout the pandemic. And if you reflect even back to the beginning of the pandemic, State Senate President Don Harmon was looking for the federal government to send Illinois $40 billion. Just go look at the archives. That story was right at the beginning of the pandemic in 2020. Former or current Senate President Don Harmon asking for $40 billion from federal taxpayers. So just setting that up, you had the states worried about its finances, Democrats worried about their finances for the state governments, asking for a bailout from the federal government, asking for increased taxes from taxpayers rejecting that. And then we get to this year, and they're praising themselves for their fiscal prowess. Where just 2 years ago, it was a pretty dire situation where they needed more taxes, they said, and even a bailout from the federal government. So now flash forward to this year, and you get the new budget that's passed, the highest spending plan in state history. This is a little bit of back and forth from Senate President Don Harmon. After the budget passed, he's standing with the governor, and then you'll hear from State Representative Tom Demmer, who on the House floor just hours before debated against the budget. So here is that back and forth on Springfield's Morning News. I'm Greg Bishop, and let's go ahead and hear this, get it all set up for you, and go.
This balanced budget builds on the solid proposal Governor Pritzker put forward in February to continue our responsible approach to budgeting and providing tax relief. Our ability to pass such an excellent budget is the result of a shared commitment among the governor, the General Assembly, and others that the $7.5 billion we received in federal aid needed to be used to pay bills and for emergency COVID costs rather than to start new programs. Our economy rebounded so well, however, that even after we took those steps, we found ourselves with several $billion remaining. We knew we wanted to provide real relief to the people who, despite our overperforming economy, are still struggling under the weight of inflation and the lingering effects of the pandemic.
And your argument at the time was without that tax increase, we would need draconian cuts. Or, as the Lieutenant Governor threatened, we'll raise taxes on every person in the state to make up for that revenue. Voters said, no more. Voters said, don't just get more revenue, focus on the expense side of the state budget. After voters said no, you continue to spend as if they said yes. The budget you passed the year that question was on the ballot originally relied on $5 billion in borrowing to make it work. You were bailed out by billions in direct federal aid in the CARES Act and the American Recovery Act. You were bailed out by billions in additional funding from the federal government in Medicaid matching funds. You were bailed out by, across the country, trillions of dollars that were injected into our economies that led to higher than expected collections in revenue for the state. Temporarily. So as we look at this year's budget and we try to ask which direction is it heading in, it's growing spending faster than we're growing revenues. It ignores the fact that voters rejected a tax increase. And when this one-time revenue dries up, the only thing you'll know how to do is go back and raise taxes yet again.
Again, State Representative Tom Demmer, followed by, before that, Senate President Don Harmon, just to kind of give you a bit of the back and forth and the different ideas there are from the opposite sides of the aisle at the Illinois State House. Again, the budget has yet to be sent to the governor. I imagine the governor is going to do a signing ceremony and probably travel the state and talk about the Illinois state budget. So we'll keep you posted on all of that debate and more because it's your tax.